I think people are hungry for authentic moral leadership in this country. And I think folks just want elected officials who are themselves and who are honest and speak directly and clearly. That's, I think, what this exposes. Folks are tired of the kind of consultant-driven, poll-tested political sound bites, and they want people who are just going to speak like a human being. And that's what I try to do every day, whether it's at a podium or a pulpit, whether it's as an elected official or as a member of the clergy.
Authentic moral leadership. Pastor Talarico makes you a contrarian in this political world, if not a unicorn, considering your background. We're in a world where sharp elbows work here in Washington, where the pressure play works, where bullying works, where name calling is now considered commonplace, par for the course. A lot of people would ask how someone who considers themselves a man of God, someone who acts as a gentleman, has any place in this political world.
Well, one of my favorite verses in Scripture is Matthew 5:5, the meek shall inherit the earth, meaning, violence, bullying, aggression, those things may work in the short run. And I think that's what you're seeing in our political discourse. It gets you a temporary bump in your followers or in your cable TV viewership, or maybe even gets you elected in the next election. But it doesn't work in the long run. In the long run, I think people want honesty, they want compassion, they want understanding. And so I'm placing my long-term bet on those values. I honestly think over the last 10 years of our politics, people are just sick of the blood sport, and they're sick of the way that politics feels like professional wrestling a lot of the times. And I'm hoping that earnestness and sincerity are going to make a comeback in our politics. At least I hope so.
Well, and it's one thing to consider our politics along party lines and partisan divides, but there are also deep divides within the parties themselves. You need look no further than Texas, as I'm sure you well know, if the primary in the Republican on the Republican side for the Senate seat between Ken Paxton and the incumbent Senator Cornyn. Are you worried that, as you consider a potential Senate run yourself, that a Democratic primary could potentially be just as damaging?
I don't think it has to be. Primary elections can be a good thing, especially if both candidates go about it in a respectful way. It should be a contest of ideas. I think we saw in the last election the consequences of not having a competitive primary. Those primaries make us better as candidates and as a party. I think that's true on both sides of the aisle. I think elections are always a good thing. Competition in politics is always a good thing. And I'm hoping that's true in this upcoming primary here in Texas.
Well, are you thinking about running for Senate? Is that a real story? And what's going into your consideration if that's the case?
I am thinking about it, but if I'm being very honest with you, my entire focus is really on the special legislative session that's just been called here in Texas. I'm sure you've covered this, but the president has asked our governor, Greg Abbott, to find him 5 more congressional seats. He wants to redraw the political maps in the middle of the decade to try to protect his majority in the next election, regardless of how we all vote. And I think this is politics at its worst. Politicians picking their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. And so I'm doing everything I possibly can to stop this gerrymander from going through, to stop this power grab from going through. I was elected by my constituents here in Central Texas to fight for them at the state capitol. That's what I'm going to do before I start thinking about other elected positions.
Well, if you view that as politics as it's at its worst, would it be a mistake for blue states like California or New York to try to follow Texas's lead and reclaim some more seats for Democrats?
I think the idea of every state being gerrymandered is a terrible vision for this country. That said, I do know that you have to stand up to bullies. You can't just lie down and let them win. And so I do think that we need folks who are willing to match energy, but we cannot lose sight of the ultimate goal, and that is fair elections in every state, fair maps in every state. I mean, every single state in this country should have an independent, citizen-led redistricting commission that takes the power to draw these maps out of the hands of politicians and puts it into the hands of the people that we seek to represent. So while we need to stand up to folks who are trying to grab onto power, like the president is currently trying to do, we can't lose sight of the ultimate vision, which is making sure that every state has fair maps and fair representation for all Americans.
Will you join other Democrats in leaving the state from keeping the majority from doing this in Texas?
Well, we're in the minority as Democrats here in the Texas Legislature. We've been in the minority for a long time. And so we've had to figure out how to use every tool in our toolbox, whether that's the rules, whether it's our platforms, or whether it is denying quorum. That's obviously a dramatic step, and it's one that shouldn't be taken lightly. We haven't even seen the maps here in Texas yet, and so I don't want to rush to any conclusions. But I will just tell you that I think it's fair to say that my Democratic colleagues and I are willing to do whatever it takes to stop this power grab and to protect the democratic process here in Texas and around the country, because if President Trump succeeds with this power grab in Texas, I worry that he will do the same thing in every red state across the country, which would essentially rig the 2026 midterms. And so regardless of your party, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or an independent, none of us want politicians in Washington silencing our voices and rigging the next election.
We'd love to have you back, James Talarico. When are you planning to make up your mind for this Senate race?
Well, I'd love to come back. The special legislative session is going to last until the end of August. And that's assuming another one won't be called right after that. So as long as I'm being called to do my job as a state representative here in the state capitol, that's what I'm going to be doing. But once that's over, I'll be looking at how I can best continue my service. And that may include running for another office in 2026.